All right, Kent, you want to tell us a bit about yourself and how you got to where you are today?
Sure. So, my name is Kent Johnson. I'm the general manager and chief operating officer of the Baltimore Country Club. I started in the hospitality industry. I think I was 13 years old because my father said I needed to learn responsibility and that nothing in this world was free. So that's sort of how it started. And I knew instantaneously that this business was, well, the hospitality industry in general was where I wanted to spend my career. So from that point, I worked up from being a dishwasher and a busboy to spending time in the back of the house operations, moving to the front of the house operations, and then finally, I guess it was 1998 that I moved into the private club space.
Yeah.
Not by any great career move. It was a job at that point at 23 years old, and it was one of those things that just one thing led to another, and clubs were an accident for me. But here it is, almost 25 years later, and we're in a pretty good spot. So I can't complain about that.
Yeah, awesome. And I was actually like looking up the website and I was like, that looks like a very nice club, the Baltimore Club is. Whoever made your website did a great job.
Yeah, that's our communications director, Rachel. She is absolutely incredible. So we're fortunate and blessed with a great team.
Yeah, big ups to Rachel. I guess the first big question that I always like to kind of jump in with is like, what do you see are your three biggest roadblocks or challenges within the hospitality space that you find yourself in?
Specifically to private clubs at this point, one definitely is staffing. We've certainly seen things start to recover more for the folks like cooks, service staff, things like that have definitely improved somewhat. But the middle managers are brutal to hire.
Yeah.
So I'd say that's probably number one, and sort of piggybacked on that are the expectations that today's workers are coming in with. That's different. We've had to adjust for that. And then specific to clubs too, where prior to COVID, clubs were sort of struggling on wondering where their next member was going to come from,
Yeah.
because every piece of data told us that millennials weren't going to join clubs, and now what's happening, right? Every millennial is joining clubs, and
They moved
particularly
home.
post COVID. Oh yeah, well, I mean it's that, but clubs provided a safe space during COVID, and so
Yeah.
now, we have these large waiting lists, which are great. But if you have a waiting list and no one's leaving, then you don't have those capital dollars coming in, which provides other challenges. So I think arguably those three things probably are the biggest issues that we have today.
It's interesting, your second issue that you mentioned there, which is like the disconnect between the expectations of the employees that you're bringing in today versus like the expectations you have on them. And presumably that's a post-COVID kind of like lifestyle expectation that people have.
Hmm.
And I hear that across the board of people like the sort of like the Gen Z who were not within like jobs for the 2-3 years that would have been in jobs potentially where the market open. So we have like almost a kind of difference in culture between the sort of like Gen X management and the Gen Z kind of introductory sort of candidates, the first kind of wave of like jobs for them. Do you see a big difference between sort of like the style of working or the requests that they have, like a Gen Z younger employee versus say like older employees?
Yeah, I mean, if you look back, like, the way that I grew up working in the industry is, you work 60, 70, 80 hours a week. And,
Yeah.
that's how you gain success, is by, showing that you had the work ethic, that you had, that you were building the expertise and all of those things. And, the generations that are coming in today, they have different expectations. So my opinion there is that they really want to work more of a 40-hour work week. They don't want to work all the nights, weekends, and holidays that the hospitality industry particularly, requires. So we've had to make adjustments for that, right? So by adjusting means that we need more people to cover the same amount of hours. And by the way, those people are now costing us more money
Yeah.
because they have additional options that maybe didn't exist before. So where I could have hired somebody for, $50,000 out of college, now I'm having to pay 65,000 to somebody that has almost no experience. Or, I've got somebody that I need that's a mid-level F&B manager that I've got to pay 85 to $100,000 for. And by the
Yeah.
way, that individual only wants to work that, 40 hours a week. So it just exacerbates the issue. And
And
that's just where the market is.
do you think how do you think about like these sort of emerging trends and how like you're adapting to them? Like how's the country club adapting to these?
We're a larger club, so we're about 29 million in annual revenue. So it's not to say that these things don't impact us, they do. Um, but we're able to scale a little bit easier in that respect. So we started about 3 years ago. So particularly with our golf professionals. So you had these young folks that would graduate from these professional golf management programs. They would come in, they'd be offered a position at, 25 or $30,000 a year. Then they would get there, they'd have to work 60, 70, 80 hours a week to teach just to make, ends meet. And, now again, in a post-COVID world, they don't want that. So we've been fortunate enough to be on the front end of those things and make those
Yeah.
adjustments prior to them becoming an issue. And it just becomes a function of the budget, which ultimately and unfortunately makes it more expensive for our members. But that's the truth.
Yeah.
And if you don't make those adjustments, if you aren't making those adjustments, then you're.
Oh no. Did I break up? Hello? Hello? Oh no. Oh no. Oh no. Are you there? Oh, can you hear me? Oh no. Okay. Let's do this. Uh fuck. Oh, thank God. Okay. You're back. Ken, can you hear me? Hello? Can you hear me, Kent? Hello? Can you hear me, Kent?
All right. Now I can hear you.
Okay, very
There we
good.
go.
Very, very good. Okay, sweet. Um, sorry, I'm not sure why that dropped there, but I apologize for that. The question we were just looking at there was you were just telling me we kind of were evolving that kind of conversation from like, that Gen Z versus like introduction to workplace. You were talking about the golf course managers. Is it golf course managers or the golf professionals you're calling them?
Golf professionals, yeah.
And you were saying this is like difficult now in terms of the expectations they have and how you guys have like managed to solve for that. It's interesting because I hear that a lot in this, where I find, especially in resorts and hotels, that they've been able to kind of get ahead of dealing with sort of the modern expectations that employees have, where versus like in restaurants that they're kind of struggling with that. But then I did hear you mention as well, just before it was, you said it's very difficult to find your sort of middle managers, almost like it's like a bit of an albatross. And it's interesting because like in restaurants it's a challenge, but it's a challenge they can do, it seems. Whereas in a lot of hotels, I've heard hotels and restaurants that like night managers are basically impossible to find now. That it's like this is something that like, and it's almost like a cultural question as much as it is about filling that gap, which is like, do people want to work that really, really important jobs, like say in a hotel where it's like there's somebody that's like the night porter or the night auditor, as some hotels call it. And I always think about it because you obviously think about this a lot as well, which is a sort of like your guest experience, your member experience, which is like delighting them constantly. Like they'll remember sort of like the bad experiences, but they're not going to really write you a review for like the really good experiences. And a lot of hotels have this problem where it's like they can't find the kind of level of candidate that can appropriately take on a responsibility like a night manager role, where somebody misses their flight and they're checking in at 3 o'clock in the morning and they got a baby crying. And how do you make them as seamlessly as possible, like check in that sense? And that kind of like almost like team player is like such a diamond in the rough to find, you know. And I'm wondering, it sounds like you're having kind of a similar issue finding that kind of person as well. I mean, albeit like you don't do like night portering, but that type of candidate.
No, but it's true. Those, we've had now food and beverage managers that we've been looking for now for almost a year. We just completed a major renovation to one of our clubhouses. And so with that, we needed to hire, I think it was 2 or 3 additional managers. We have just now filled one role, just now. And the side of things, we've just in the last month filled one of the 3 roles that we have available. It is really, really tough. And, the folks that are coming in that do apply, you're lucky if you get a call back for an interview. We had one woman, we offered the job to, she was qualified, but she had green hair. That doesn't fit with our standards. And we said, look, we'd love to offer you the job, but you need to change your hair. And she flatly refused. And I mean, but that is the level of what we're having to deal with right now. And it's unfortunate that that's the case, but I don't, and we as an organization are not going to reduce our standards for what we look for in folks, just to be able to fill a spot. So it's unfortunate, but that's the reality.
Totally. I mean, I hear that a lot with like, we work with a lot of like sort of like fine dining groups, for example, as well. So like, obviously we'll work with like, say, a Chick-fil-A, and it's like barrier to entry for a candidate is like, are you a teenager and are you polite and are you willing to work hard? Like, you know what I mean? Whereas like, say, Union Square Hospitality is like, no, like we own like very premium New York restaurants. And to your point about like your green hair, we hear a lot about like, say, tattoos, for example. And it's like people want to like have tattoos in a lot of places, not necessarily want to have like very visible sort of like sleeves or whatever, and whether or not that's like a deal breaker for people. So again, you're not really alone on that. And it's like very much like almost like kind of, your attributes of what you're looking for. Like if you think about like an onion, it's almost like like how many layers you have to peel to find that right person. But obviously when you get down to the nub, you lose a lot of the universe of candidates that could potentially come in and do it. So I appreciate it's such like a fine kind of line for you. I suppose on that message then is like, do you think like the job market is strong or weak, or what's your take on it within hospitality, given that you have such a kind of higher standard?
I think it's tough. I think the folks may be there. I think clubs are additionally challenged just because we're sort of sandwiched in between hotels and restaurants, where there might only be, 4,000 clubs nationally in the country versus hotels and restaurants, right? And so I don't know that the candidate pool truly realizes what opportunities exist within clubs themselves. I think as an industry, we can do a better job touting who we are, what we are, and the benefits of working in a club versus, working in a hotel or working in a restaurant, because in my opinion, there are significant benefits that exist there. So the job market in that sense, we've sort of created the challenges on our own. But I think largely, the market itself for that mid-level person is challenged because there's so many spots open and just not enough folks that are willing to fill them. And I do think that
it's definitely something I've heard as well, like since post-COVID, that type of promotable managerial class kind of disappeared from the market. Like openings, closings. People are like, I got a family, I can't deal with this like oscillating opening, closing sort of COVID kind of positioning. And so what seems to have happened across the board in this sort of true for some, relevant for all phrase that I keep throwing out there is like that type of person that would have been promoted into those managerial positions is no longer in the market. And it seems like we hear a lot that say Amazon, DoorDash, Uber Eats have hoovered a lot of that kind of talent, where it's like they can get paid They can just be in a fulfillment center. They can, listen to a podcast all day and get access to potential free college. But then I hear on the inverse that people are born into hospitality, which is in and of itself a unique sort of statement that people have. And I'm curious your take on that, that like people who are in hospitality always want to be in hospitality. Like, how do you, when you hear me say that, what do you think?
It's interesting. I do think that hospitality requires a special type of individual to do it, especially, the particular brand of hospitality that we aspire to. But I also think that can be taught. If we think back to just the basics, right, of people that like to do nice things for people. And even if you distill things down to that, give me that person any day, and they will be successful, in my opinion, in the hospitality industry, because it is so much about caring and wanting to do for others. And in most cases, I can tell you in my particular instance, I never got into the hospitality industry thinking that I was going to, become a multimillionaire or, have this like great career of owning all these restaurant chains. And, it was none of that. It was literally just an ability for me to try and help take care of others that, that's the part about this that I love. So it's interesting, but, yeah, it's a fun place to be. I think in some cases you are born into it, but I think in others, it's one of those things that, if you truly just want a way to care for people, this is a great industry to be able to do it.
Totally. And I guess then, like, how do you think about like retention for your staff that you have today? Because obviously you're saying that like, it's very hard to like, staffing is the number one challenge that you have. Number two is like the middle management and the middle management level acquisition, but also like the Gen Z kind of culture, the different, I don't want to say Gen Z because I feel like it's throwing them under the bus, but like the difference in like sort of culture in hospitality over the last few years has kind of shifted. How do you think then about retention, given that the acquisition of candidates is so hard?
I think a lot about retention, and I think you hit the nail on the head when you talk about culture. And that culture piece is so incredibly important that you can't just magically say the word culture and think that it just appears, right? Some friends of mine, 3 and Jackie Carpenter, wrote a book called People First. And in the book, they talk about how culture has the shelf life of a banana, right? And if you think about that, it's so true, particularly in the instance of retention. So if we are not physically doing more for and taking care of our folks, then how can we expect that they're going to have any degree of loyalty to us and want to stay with us? So in our case, we want to sort of remove the pay and make sure that our team is being compensated more than fairly, which we do. But then it even transcends pay, where it becomes, how are you treating your team just as an individual, right? Are you investing in your team? Are you taking care of your team? Do you love your team? And those are the things that I think we've really excelled with. We have one position on our team now that all they do is their sole focus is to make sure that our team is happy. And that's definitely been an emerging trend that we've seen in clubs over the course of probably the last year to 2 years. And it's the things that we do for our team. It's the scholarship opportunities that we provide. It's, the fact that you can use those scholarships not only for, your family, you can also use them for your own student loans. There's all the different bonuses and the Orioles tickets that we have, or the Capitals tickets that we have, various other elements of programs that we provide them to be benefit to them outside of the walls of the club. And if you're not doing those things for your team, and if those things that you are doing are not genuine, you get it.
It's interesting as well, you mentioned the walls, because I hear that a lot about the 4 walls, like what are we doing outside the 4 walls for these employees? It sounds like you really have a program and process there. Sometimes I hear from people and they talk about culture and they can't really describe it to me. They can't define it to me. And I know, what's the famous line? It's hard to describe it, when you see it. Like, there are policies and practices businesses can put in place that can kind of enable better culture, and designing a process to enable it and kind of ferment it and kind of, have it kind of grow, like almost like greenhouse it, And it sounds like you very much have it locked down. Like, when there are like, I speak to a lot of people and they talk about like retention and they use like metrics for measuring that. Are there particular kind of metrics that you use that you look at? You go, okay, this is like a red alert, this is like an amber alert, or like, are there ways you look at certain numbers that you can go, these are what I need to be on?
Well, you know, there's the number side of it, right? There's, you know, the quarterly interviews that we do with all the teams that are all anonymous. And then we, as an executive team, will take that information and we look and see, okay, what gaps do we have? What things do we need to fill? Or what things are we not doing that we could or should be doing? But it has to go beyond that too. It's, you know, if the boss walks into the room, what's the team telling you by not telling you? Do they get quiet? Do they leave the room? You know, are they laughing? Are they having a good time when they're there on property? You know, there's a lot of other cues and things like that that you have to be measured, you know, that have to be measured as well. And because that's how your team is looking at you. They're not just looking at their paycheck, right? So they want to know that they're valuable to you and that there's value to them and what they're doing. And that value is deeply rooted in their relationship with you as an employer and as their supervisor. They're also looking at how the experience is in the environment that you're providing. And then they're going to look at how much money they're making. And if you're missing on any one of those elements, you know, your ability to be able to retain those folks it's just going to continue to deteriorate quickly.